Good evening and welcome to Tracking the Tropics. This is your weekly in-depth look at the hurricane season and how it will impact you. We are 20 days into October, 21 weeks through the hurricane season. And tonight we've got two systems we're keeping an eye on. I'll break them both down for you here in a minute. Later we're going to talk about bigger picture stuff with the tropics, though, about what's been going on the past several years and our elevated activity in the tropics. We'll go up to Richmond, Virginia and talk about when this overall activity may be decreasing. But first, here's the very latest on the fifth Greek letter name storm this season, Tropical Storm Epsilon. That's where we will begin tonight. Big picture, Epsilon is some 600 miles southeast of Bermuda and is far enough away for the East Coast where the only thing we'll have to worry about on this side of the country is some higher than average waves as well as some rip currents. Otherwise, it's expected to stay out to sea, but it's got a pretty nice swirl. And as you do the eye test on the satellite tonight, the system looks a little better organized than it did some 24 hours ago. And that's saying something because there's a few things working against this system trying to tear it apart. Yet tonight, it's holding on as a tropical storm. The other thing we're keeping an eye on, we just got an update from the National Hurricane Center, is an area of thunderstorms in the Western Caribbean that the Hurricane Center has now said, listen, because of all these upper level winds, there's now no chance of this developing in the next couple of days. More on that in a second, but here's a closer look at Tropical Storm Epsilon, and the 8 o'clock Eastern Time update from the National Hurricane Center keeps winds at 65 miles per hour. Remember, to become a hurricane, you need 74 mile per hour winds, and that very well might happen either later tonight, but most likely on Wednesday. Gusts are up to 75 miles per hour, and it's moving northwest at 13. I say it like that because yesterday at some point and earlier this week, it was actually stationary. And stationary storms are always a little scary because they're harder to forecast, and especially when you're Bermuda out there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean as a small island, you want to know where this thing is going. And it looks like they will avoid a direct impact, but it is going to come close enough where they will have some rough weather, especially as we head into Thursday night. Now, I mentioned a second ago that it's amazing this storm is holding on like it has. It is well put together, but there are two things working against it. One, upper level winds, and the other, which you can see here behind me, dry air. Two things that aren't good for developing tropical systems. And you can see on the water vapor satellite where the dry air is, because that's showing up in orange. Obviously, here's the whole structure of Tropical Storm Epsilon, but look at all the dry air trying to get into the system, and some of it is, but the system has developed almost an eye wall and kind of an outer structure of clouds that almost is protecting what would be the center of this system. So in the meteorological world, that's pretty amazing that despite some upper level wind shear, which usually tears system apart, and despite dry air trying to get into this system, that it has strengthened over the past 24 hours. Now, like I said, the only thing that this thing is going to be worrying about is Bermuda, the island of Bermuda. It's some 600 miles away. Here's what the computer models are saying where that center might go. And as you can see, the island of Bermuda right here, most of the computer models slowly but surely keep it to the east. Now, that means they'll avoid a direct impact, but they still will have some impacts over the next 48 hours. So the forecast track keeps it as a tropical storm tonight. And then sometime in the overnight hours or during the day, it will strengthen with winds up to 80 miles per hour, making it a Category 1 hurricane. It will hold that as it makes its close pass just to the east of Bermuda sometime on Thursday, and then continuing to move north and eventually curving off to the northeast like all storms do as we head into the weekend. So no impacts obviously for the United States. However, like I said, up and down the east coast, there will be higher than average surf, there will be rip currents, and this is all coming as we get closer to a full moon, which means a lot of coastal communities will have some slightly higher tide. So there might be some other impacts along the East Coast, but nothing directly. The other system we are keeping an eye on, I guess we're no longer having to keep an eye on it because the National Hurricane Center just downgraded this from a 10% chance of developing over the next couple of days to a 0%. And it's where you see that yellow X. There is an elongated area of low pressure, some disorganized thunderstorms that really just can't compete with the upper level winds that are pushing it the other way. And those upper level winds keep the system from developing. So when you have a formed system like Tropical Storm Epsilon, and it gets dry air or upper level wind shear, it can hold itself together because it's already well established. But when you have something that's trying to form and it just keeps getting beat up by these upper level winds and the dry air, despite the warm water, just no chance of survival. So nothing to worry about there. We'll continue to keep our eye on Tropical Storm Epsilon, which, as I said, is the 5th named storm in the Greek alphabet, the 26th overall. Up next on the list is Zeta and Eta. Remember, because we've gone through the entire list of regular storm names, we have moved into the Greek alphabet. Epsilon, the 26th named storm of the season, and that continues to inch us closer to the all-time busiest Atlantic hurricane season on record. That was in 2005. We had 28 named storms. Now, when you go back and look in the history books, remember, 2005, after the season was over, the National Hurricane Center came back and added in a storm that at the time they did not add during the season. So 28 named storm, kind of with an asterisk, but at this point with Epsilon already checked off the list in 2020, we are 2 away from tying that all-time record. So I got to thinking this week, remember back at the beginning of the season when we were only talking about hurricane forecast and outlook for the whole season? Well, how are we doing? So remember, 26 named storms is where we've gotten so far. We've currently had 9 hurricanes. That's probably going to become 10 tomorrow. So let's go with 26 and 10, named storms and hurricanes. So here are all the outlooks from earlier in the season, from North Carolina State University here in Raleigh, from Colorado State University out in Colorado, obviously, and from our government, NOAA. So named storms, the average is 12. Obviously, we blew that out of the water. NC State said 18 to 22. Colorado State said 24. And our government said 19 to 25. We're at 26. Hurricanes, we're about ready to have 10. The average is 6. NC State said 8 to 11. Colorado State said 12. And NOAA said 7 to 11. So while we are going above and beyond with named storms, at the beginning of the season when we looked at these numbers and we're like, wow, are we really going to do this? Yes, we have done this. And remember, we are on the downslope of tropical activity. The season that starts June 1st and ends November 30th peaked on September 10th. Today is October 20th, and we are on the downslope as we look at average activity over the years. We are definitely on the downslope, but it's always interesting to compare where we are on this side of the graph versus this side. So the activity that we normally see around October 20th is very similar to what we see in early August. But as you can also see, over the past week, there has been an average decrease that's pretty drastic. So we are definitely on the back end of the busiest part of the season as we go to the back end of October. And the hurricane season is coming to an end when you have pictures like this of 5 to 6 inches of snow in central Minnesota today. So while some parts of the country have already started winter, other parts are warm and still keeping an eye on the tropics like we are doing here tonight. Let's bring in our first guest here on Tracking the Tropics tonight. Let's go up to Richmond, Virginia. WRIC Chief Meteorologist John Bernier is up there talking with us today. John, we talked to you earlier in the season, and before we get into some big picture stuff, which I think is really amazing, what do you think about this season we're living through? I mean, we kind of knew this was going to happen, but now that it's happening, do you have to pinch yourself that it really is?
Not surprised how well it happened because of the setup with the La Nina developing, the warm Atlantic Ocean. One thing to note, you were discussing the numbers, tropical storms, named storms versus hurricanes. You go back and compare that. The actual, on a percentage basis, the number of hurricanes is a little bit lower for that number of tropical systems, which tells me Many of these storms have been a little bit on the weaker side, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we start talking about some of the longer-term trends. By the way, you were talking about the satellite photo. We have real-time Viper dialed up with the satellite photo of Epsilon, and also we are seeing that eye kind of in the northeastern quadrant developing, so this may be very close to becoming a hurricane, probably by the time you and I wake up tomorrow morning.
The National Hurricane Center, their exact words were, could become a hurricane soon. Like, they wouldn't be surprised if it happened tonight. But let's talk bigger picture because, you know, John, we're in the middle of a really busy period of tropical activity. And I'm not talking just this year, over the past several years. And as you can see on the graph behind me, 2005, 28 named storms. This is all part of a cycle that we're in. Can you kind of walk us through how this cycle works? It goes as long as 25 years.
Yeah, let's go ahead in here, and we go to the board behind us, and this is from the year 1851 all the way through 2009, because we're the last decade complete, showing the number of United States hurricanes. And you notice the 1800s, and remember in the 1800s, we didn't have computers, we didn't have telephones, we had telegraph. That was it. Isaac Storm in the year 1900 down in Galveston, Texas, Isaac Klein, that is, communicating with meteorologists in Cuba by telegraph, okay, to talk about what's going on. So here's what's going on. We had very active period, and then you see the storms kind of stay a little busy, but then we get into the 70s and 80s. We start getting a drop-off here. Let's bring you into this one. This is a little bit better. This is United States hurricane strikes by decade. So in the decade of the 1860s, about 23 storms, and you notice that's really the highest until you get here into the 1960s, okay? 1960s, big time striking. So we were really busy, got to around 1940, dropped off, then we picked up, and then the bottom fell out. So we got into the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, down, and even here in the early 2000s, it wasn't that much, although there were a lot more storms out in the ocean. Now, one thing to remember with this, the 1940s was when we got aircraft reconnaissance. My father actually flew after World War II on some of those missions. And then, of course, 1966 is considered to be the beginning of the satellite era because that's when we had the first operational GOES satellite over us here. So this is kind of a look here. Tropical storms in the Atlantic Basin over time. The gray one right here is named storms. And then as we go through, we've got Category 1 and 2 and major hurricanes, which, of course, major hurricanes, the Katrinas, the Andrews, the Ivans, okay? Those are the ones that cause a tremendous amount of damage. So we're here in 1969. We got Camille, very busy year, okay, as you can see, and several unnamed storms then, just like we had that one in 2005. And this is when, you know, really the Saffir-Simpson scale got implemented for it. And then you see we're kind of quiet through the 70s and 80s, okay? We're down most of the years, right down here, less than this bar that goes right across the screen, okay? They're down, kind of quiet, kind of low. We get into the early 80s, about 83, 84, really not that much going on. And then we get into 2005. We've got Katrina, more impressively, Katrina causing tremendous damage. But you have to remember Wilma was an even more impressive storm later on. And Wilma did what you were talking about with Epsilon earlier being stationary, got off the Yucatan Peninsula, stalled. And when you have a storm like that, it's like giving one of my grandchildren $20 and turning them loose in the toy store. You don't know which way they're going to go because we can't forecast that. And then we get into, again, 17. We don't have 18 and 19 on here, but you see the uptick in the storms right then. Another way to look at this here is the number of landfalling U.S. hurricanes. Again, you know, we're talking, this is average, the 20-year mean. It spiked up here as we got to 1875, and they kind of dropped. And then we get into the 50s and 60s. And then, of course, remember, this looks backwards. So look at the drop in the 1970s. That created, of course, a problem. And then it's picked up a little bit ever since then. So again, we've seen these cycles where they go through, and this one in the 70s, a big drop, and in a way that's really kind of important for the way things are playing out right now, Wes. We'll get to that in a second. I want to show you this. This is one that talks about, we talk about the strength of storms. This is the average U.S. hurricane power per year. Okay, really, this is kind of like in a way, playing fantasy football with the storms, okay? You know, where you put your fantasy football team together and you put all your statistics. Well, this is kind of a statistical way of looking at it. So this is the number of storms times the average Saffir-Simpson intensity. So right here, that's a 4. Going all the way down, as you can see, to a 3. And you see the hurricane power peaking in the 1880s, peaking in the 1950s, dropping here around 1980. And then this year, coming to this year, it's really come down. And the reason for that is while we've had the 26 storms, we haven't had storms that have been as powerful as like what we saw back in 2005. So that's a key factor. While we've had, you know, trust me, our friends in Louisiana who have gotten hit twice, terrible, terrible for them. But we haven't had the storms with the power that we've seen in some previous years overall. This is another way of looking at it. So a number calculated out called the ACE, which is the Accumulated Cyclone Index. Okay, so that's like, it's basically accumulated cyclone energy. So it's how much energy is contained in all these storms. It's kind of the same graphic that we just showed you in a little different span. All right, but this is kind of, it's a geeky nerd science that we use for researchers.
John, before we get into that,
yes.
So you're talking about these big chunks of active times and big chunks of not so active times, and that power index, you mentioned Louisiana. So the power index is going down there at the end, but how do you explain that to everyone in Southwest Louisiana that had Sally and Marco and Laura? How does that work?
Again, this is looking at the average Saffir-Simpson intensity times the number of storms, okay? So what it's explaining to us is that while we've had a tremendous number of storms, okay, and again, like you said, Southwest Louisiana, the poor people down there by Lake Charles, terrible situation for them, okay? But we've had a lot of very weak storms otherwise this year that factor into that, okay? So a lot of weak storms. Again, this kind of shows the same thing. You can have an active season of weak storms and you're not going to accumulate a lot of energy. But you notice here, the energy numbers here, as we go down here, so this is, again, 1960, and I got to read this backwards, but there's 1970. Look at how we're so far down the bar here. And then we get into 1995. We jump way up. We come up here. There's 2005, which is the kingpin. That's Katrina, Wilma, and Rita. And then, of course, we're over here, 16, 17. This is 17 right here, which is Harvey, Wilma, and Maria. And, of course, we've got numbers that were up again. This year so far, while we've had almost as many storms as 2005, the accumulated energy from all of them, because we've had a weaker number of storms, or number of storms that have been weaker than the other ones, is not going to be as high. And that's a key thing. This is, you know, this is looking at the overall picture. And one thing to remember, you go back to 1992, which is right here, kind of low. It's got a little spike above 91 and 93. You go right here to 1992. 1992 was a very quiet hurricane season. Problem was, the first one was named Andrew. It was a Category 5, and it nailed southern Florida. And we all know the stories about all the issues, and of course, and all the tremendous lessons we learned from that. So you have to remember, when we look at all these storms, you always have to remember it's location, 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 location. 50 hurricanes, 50 Category 5 storms spinning out there in the open Atlantic aren't going to cause a problem, but just one nasty one hitting a major populated area of the U.S. is going to be a problem. And this drop here creating part of that problem to talk about. All right, I want to show you this. This is the number of U.S. landfall major hurricanes by decade. It's actually, the average number has been dropping, okay? This was through 2018. It's come up a little bit. Really, 2011 through 2020, really kind of quiet, okay? And this may be the start of a slowdown in the seasons. So we've got something here called the AMO index. And that's the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. Oscillations in weather are swings, okay? We get into the winter, we'll talk about something called the North Atlantic oscillation. We'll talk about the Arctic oscillation. Those are all things that affect winter patterns across the entire United States. So here's the thing. Here we go. We go back into the 1880s. We're in an on cycle. Okay, and the numbers come up. And there's a little bit of a time lag here that happens. Then we go into a down cycle from about close to 1900 to just after 1920. And you see the down cycle in activity. Then we go back up from the late 1930s all the way to the late 1960s. All right? This is that very active period, 1969 Camille, 1965 Betsy hitting down in Miami. And then you also get into the 70s and 80s, and this drops off the table right through here. Drops off the table, and then 1995, the switch gets turned back on. Once again, it's been that way all the way to now. Sometime in the future, I can't say 21, I can't say 25, I can't say 2030. This cycle is probably going to flip again. And we know that the Earth's cycles and patterns do go through routine changes, just like the solar cycle goes through that. So we will probably see a period where we'll get into a cool phase of the AMO, which may slow down the occurrence of hurricanes.
Right, John.
Remember, it only takes one.
Yes. That graphic makes it look so simple. Higher activity, lower, higher, lower, higher, lower. How long do these cycles last? And you said we can't predict it exactly, but when might we, in a time range, come out of this busy activity we're in right now?
If these cycles last 25 to 30 years, we're now in year 25 of this. So we could be talking within the next, let's say the next 5 to 7 years, there is a good possibility we will come out of this cycle. So there's a good possibility of that. So,
okay, and what about,
but of course,
I was going to say, what about all the damage that, you know, these storms are producing? There's a way to kind of break that down, isn't there?
Yeah, right here, okay, this is the damage resulting from landfalling hurricanes in 10-year increments. And I picked up this graphic, and I noticed it stopped at 1990, which is actually a very good thing, okay, very good thing, because I want to show this to you. So here we go in the years all the way up through World War II. Then we get into the 1950s. This is when suburbia America really started to develop. You see the numbers going, and it jumps up here. Just the numbers is 22. It's damage in billions. That's for the decade of the 1960s, and then it drops in the 70s and 80s. With that, it drops. Remember, we had a dramatic drop in the cycle back then, but these numbers really didn't drop, and there's a reason for it. A very good reason for that. And that is, starting in the 1970s, we had essentially an exodus in the United States from the Rust Belt in the Northeast to the Sun Belt. Tremendous population growth in the southeastern part of the country, down in Texas, down in California. And I've actually got a pretty good way of showing this to you, of what the changes are. Remember, 2 weeks from now, you're not doing Tracking the Tropics in 2 weeks, Wes, right?
Well, fingers are crossed. Fingers are crossed. Fingers are crossed because, you know, trust me, us guys as meteorologists, election night is the easiest night of the year for us to work because, you know, we don't have that much to do. Other things going on in the country,
nasty.
yes.
Other things going on in the country. So, census is taken every 10 years. Okay, so went to the 1972 election. That was Nixon's re-election in 1972. Massachusetts, District of Columbia, the only states that voted for George McGovern out of South Dakota, who actually I used to meet every once in a while. I want to show you back here. This is the Electoral College. You'll be hearing a lot about that over the next couple of weeks out there. I want to point out the numbers up here. There were 21 votes in Michigan, 27 Pennsylvania, 41 over in New York, 25 in Ohio, 17 in Florida, 12 in Georgia, 26 in Texas. 1970s to 1980s, we've had a, besides the population of the country growing, we've had a shift and a boom in the southeastern part of the United States. These are the numbers for this year. The map, of course, is gray because there's been no votes. New York is down to 29. 16 in Michigan, 20 over in Pennsylvania. Texas up to 38, 29 over in Florida, 15 in North Carolina, 16 over in Georgia. If I go back, you can see Georgia had 12, 13 over in North Carolina back then. So this is where a lot of the population growth has happened, and this is a hurricane-prone region. So one of the things that we've had is people got into the 1970s. They started moving down to the south. You had a tremendous population down through here, the southeastern part of the United States, that moved in the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s. no experience with dealing with a major hurricane making landfall in that area. And one of the things, when we are a very mobile society, we move around the country, we like familiarity. That's why McDonald's as a company has done so well, because essentially what you buy at McDonald's in Richmond, Virginia, you can buy in, in Sacramento, California. Basically, it's the exact same menu. But one of the things people did when they moved to the Southeast, they made housing choices that were very similar to, for example, a house that you would get in Massachusetts. Well, the house at Seven Gables that you have in Massachusetts isn't going to do very well in a tropical storm down in Florida. So you've got kind of design issues. You've also got increased population issues, and that's why the damage numbers have gone up so dramatically, even though we went through a period of low activity, population came down here, and then it all got turned on, and we've seen damage costs go right up through the roof.
Yeah. John, that is a fascinating sociology and scientific explanation about what's been happening with these cycles and the population. You mentioned the election in 2 weeks. Well, tonight, a very important event, Game 1 of baseball's World Series. Unfortunately, your Red Sox, my Cardinals, are not playing, but I want to kind of pivot and talk about how hurricanes have impacted some big sporting events. And I want to take everyone back. I want to show our viewers 1975. Whether you're a fan of the Red Sox or not, you've probably seen this video. Carlton Fisk, he takes a swing, the ball's going down the line, he's kind of trotting after home plate, he's pushing that ball fair to stay fair, he's pushing it, it stays fair. It's a home run in the 1975 World Series. Now, the Red Sox didn't go on to win that one, but the meteorological event that impacted this series is a tropical depression. I don't think anyone remembers that, darn it. Tell us about what happened in and around that home run with hurricanes and how it impacted history.
There was a system that was kind of a cross between a tropical depression, a trough off the East Coast, 3 days of rain between Game 5 and Game 6, okay, that went through. And so the game was delayed. Everybody had all their pitchers available and stuff. So that game started 3 days. 3 days later, again, Carlton Fisk. A lot of people don't remember Bernie Carbo, who played one time for the Cincinnati Reds, played for the Red Sox. He was a pinch hitter. He looked horrible at the plate. Swang at 2 pitches. It would be like you and me swinging the bat out there in Major League Baseball. It looked miserable. Then he hit a 3-run pinch hit homer that tied the game. A lot of people don't remember that. He hit 2 pinch hit home runs in that World Series. And, you know, weather's also affected other World Series and stuff. 1979, Baltimore Orioles against the Pittsburgh Pirates, the We Are Family series, because that's when the song by Sister Sledge, that, by the way, is from Philadelphia, actually was very popular. The first game of that World Series actually was snowed out. And then 1986, that's the 1986, the painful World Series. Bill Buckner letting the ball go through the wickets. Game 7 delayed by rain in that World Series game, which, by the way, forced them to play it on a Monday night. The New York Giants were playing, I believe it was the Washington Redskins at the same time over in the Meadowlands. Well, they were playing at Shea Stadium. Lowest rated Monday Night Football game ever that night. And then, of course, the other one, since we're talking about the Red Sox, we've got to go back to 2004 when the Red Sox did beat some baseball team from St. Louis, okay, in the World Series, but nobody cared about the World Series and the fact that they won the World Series, because that was the American League Championship Series, the resurrection, the 4 greatest days in the history of Boston sports.
You guys came back from 3-0, right?
0-3 against the evil empire of baseball, the Yankees, to win that. Game 4 was rained out, and they had to play the 4 games, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Game 4, David Ortiz, Big Pappy, hit the walk-off home run. Game 5, which is known as the Caroline Rogers game, okay, was the one that went 14 innings, 15 innings. Caroline Rogers just turned 16. And that was the one that Big Pappy got the hit in extra innings to win it. The Houston Astros and the Cardinals in that game were playing that night also in one of their games, which is the Monday night game. Right. They were playing in that game. That game started 3.5 hours after the Red Sox game ended 24 minutes after the Red Sox versus Yankees. By the way, a little story for you. The reason why that's known as the Caroline Rogers game is that there was a family. They were expecting their child. As a mom was being induced at the hospital, told her husband, go to the game because they're diehard Red Sox fans,
Right.
went to the game. He's calling her and saying, did you see that hit? Did you see that hit? And she's telling him basically, the baby's coming right now. And he literally ran to the hospital from the stadium to the game. The child has a signed baseball from every member of the 2004 Red Sox team. Again, she's turning 16 like last weekend. And also has a David Ortiz game bat, which they say they're going to sell to pay for her college education. The rumor, never confirmed, is true or false, it's the bat he got the hit to win that game.
Wow. Yeah, that'll pay. The way college tuition is, that might pay for a small part of college tuition. But John, I'll share this with you and our viewers, and I hate to turn this into a baseball show, but 2004, Game 4, I was at that game. Being a Cardinals fan, I'd never been to a World Series. A buddy of mine had got tickets to Game 4 and Game 5. I was out of town, so had to come in town for one of the games. He let me go to Game 4. Obviously, there was never a Game 5, so I saw the Red Sox sweep my Cardinals, Game 4 of the World Series in 2004. In front of me, we were on the upper deck. 4 grown men, Red Sox fans, were bawling their eyes out as the Red Sox won for the first time in many, many, many years. So.
It was 86 years. The death rate in New England skyrocketed because everyone could die happy. By the way, Game 4 of the World Series that year, the winning pitcher was Derek Lowe, who is the only, if I'm correct, the only pitcher to win the clinching game, Divisional Series, League Championship Series, World Series, all the same year.
All right, we've done it, John. We've turned this from a tropical show into a sports baseball show, but that is good stuff.
Yep.
And John, it's always good to talk to you. That's John Bernier up in Richmond, Virginia, joining us tonight on Tracking the Tropics. All right, see, we can all get along. He's a Red Sox fan. I'm a Cardinals fan. We can get through everything going on in our world today. And that is our world today in the tropics. We want to thank you for spending part of your night with us on Tracking the Tropics. We'll be back next Tuesday at 8 Eastern, same time, same place that you're watching us now. We look forward to seeing you for another edition of Tracking the Tropics. For everyone involved tonight, from Raleigh to Richmond, live in North Carolina, I'm Wes Hohenstein. Good night.